Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, kia ora tātou katoa, and thanks to all of those who contributed their kōrero tonight. It's a bit strange coming back to the House today, Mr. Speaker. I've been away all day at the tangi for a young man taken just a couple of days ago in Whakatāne, Hāwea Verko. And talking about provocation, well, I don't know what happened with provocation to that young man, but he lost his life at a very young age, leaves a young family, and there were a couple of hundred people at his marae today. So it's a bit difficult coming back to the House thinking about him, and also thinking about the stories that other members have provided as background information this afternoon and this evening. Nō reira, kia ora tātou katoa. Mr. Speaker, as others have said tonight, the aim of the bill to amend the Crimes Act to abolish the partial defence of provocation. And I was thinking how we would describe this concept in te reo rangatira, in te reo Māori. Whakakarangirangi is to provoke. Or we might refer to te mura o te ahi, the heat of passion. There are concepts which refer a state of being out of control, like wairangi, of losing all self-discipline, the state of mental disorder and chaos which leads to an offence. In the language of the street, though, provocation is a term that is associated with the myth most commonly referred to as he or she asked for it. In other words, the way, possibly, that a woman looks, the clothes that she is wearing, the location that she is visiting, the activity she's involved with, the time of the day she's out, the look in her eye are all apparently valid reasons sometimes for taking advantage of her. Mr. Speaker, the Māori Party wants to state categorically that no one asks to be raped, no one asks to be abused, no one asks to be killed. Nothing, and I repeat, nothing that a victim does, says or wears is any justification at all for an offence. Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely appropriate to be debating this bill the day after White Ribbon Day, an international day of action in which we wear the white ribbon to show that we do not condone violence towards women. What we will do today in celebration of our families and our universal hope for their peace and safekeeping is to take out the partial defence which has been used for the ultimate violence, the violence of murder. So as other speakers have noted, provocation is a partial defence that, when successful, can reduce a charge of murder to manslaughter. In effect, what this means in practice is that the charge laid against the offender can be reduced from murder to manslaughter if the offender can prove that circumstances were enough to deprive him of self-control and that this induced him or her to commit murder. So we were particularly persuaded by the logic of the Human Rights Commission, who acknowledged that at the heart of the defence of provocation is the need for balancing conflicting sets of human rights, the rights to life, to justice and to a fair trial. The Human Rights Commission also considers that the interests of victims' families are of particular relevance and that this bill protects and respects their dignity. Mr. Speaker, we're also interested in the views of the National Collective of Independent Women's Refuges, who stated unequivocally that it is unacceptable for the defence to be used by people who have struck out in anger. All that this does is to reward a lack of self-control by enabling an intentional killing to be categorised as something other than murder. In their experience, victims of family violence have not benefited from this defence at all. Indeed, perversely, the defence has been used more often and more successfully by perpetrators of family violence against their victims. So we all know that reality, having observed the highly televised ordeal of the family, the whānau, who had to suffer the indignity of their loved one subjected to a horrific trial in which the one who had incurred the greatest injustice was unable to take the stand in defence. Her voice had been silenced, her truth was unheard, while the offender had the luxury of the court of public opinion to put forward his version of events. So I agree with Leanne Dalzell that the media fascination come obsession with recent trials was certainly bordering on disrespectful disrespectfulness of the families who suffered the humiliation of hearing their loved ones insulted and degraded by the offender's defence. Mr. Speaker, in our consultation with Māori working in the law profession, we found that there was support for repealing provocation, provided that something is written into the Sentencing Act for judges to take account of provocation in sentencing, and in doing so to have regard to the offender's special characteristics when assessing whether that person was likely to have been provoked. We sought advice about the process by which we might make an amendment to the Sentencing Act 2002 to add the statement "and any special characteristics" when judges are considering circumstances such as provocation for sentencing after a conviction of murder has been given. It appears, however, that such an amendment is outside of the scope of the bill and is therefore out of order and unable to be tabled. So, in effect, the bill is very narrowly focused. It simply repeals the provocation defence. To amend the Sentencing Act is to extend the scope of the bill, which is not possible under standing orders. But notwithstanding this advice, we do suggest that the cultural characteristics of a person should be brought into account when making that assessment for a sentence. We are aware that some things which are not hugely offensive for the average person might be highly offensive for a particular offender because of their particular Māori, Islamic or other cultural background. We recall that Section 16 of the Criminal Justice Act 1995 allows an offender's supporter to present information at sentencing about an offender's ethnic or cultural background, the way that that may relate to the offending, and the way that that may help in avoiding future offending as well. And it may well be useful to look again at the application of this provision. So in closing, I want to acknowledge the initiative taken by Leanne Dazelle, Tēnā koe, to Charles Chevelle and Simon Power working together across the House on such an important change to the legislation. We in the Māori Party are proud to stand with the other parties and to say there is no excuse, whether it be the questioning of sexual performance, homosexual advances, the lifestyle, the clothes, the way of being. There is no excuse for violence, and there most certainly is no excuse for even partial defence for murder. The Māori Party is pleased to support this bill. Kia ora tātou.